Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Miles. Join us for another Relationship Anarchy research conversation. Together we talk about shedding internalized scripts of normality, healing in community, and expanding our capacity for intimacy. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Nicole. I am a sex and relationship psychotherapist with training in psychedelic integration therapy, and I am also the founder of the Pleasure Practice, supporting individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, I love these relationship anarchy conversations. There is so much expansion with each conversation that I have, so much to learn from the relationship anarchists that trust me to come onto the show, to join the conversation and join the community. And so I am grateful for Miles. I am grateful for all of the relationship anarchists that have come onto the show to answer these questions that started with my dissertation research many years ago. And dear listener, if you are interested in joining the conversation, there is a form on my website, modernanarchypodcast.com, under the Relationship Anarchy tab, where you can submit your answers to these same questions and be invited onto the show to have a conversation with me. And yeah, I just love these conversations. I am so grateful to be in community with you, dear listener. And Miles talks about the need to shed, and I thought it was funny because that is a part of my 2025 New Year's resolution, to shed anything that is no longer serving me, right? The only inevitability that we have is change. Who I am today is different than who I will be tomorrow, who I will be in a couple of months, years, right? And you too, dear listener, what parts of yourself have you already shed? What is something that you know you need to shed, right? The scripts of who we are and where we are going. And the further and further I get into expansive relating, I really explore new challenges, new moments of stretching and feeling into new complexity, and also new moments of beauty, new moments of security, of feeling really secure in the expansiveness. We love that. And yeah, I'm just really resonating with the inevitability of change and that shedding process that we are all going through as human beings in this world. And dear listener, I really hope that you have a beautiful, bright, full community that can hold you in that process and witness your change. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and resources at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people. So thank you. I also want to say a shout out to our newest member, John. Thank you. Thank you for joining the community. Thank you for supporting the show. It is truly Patreon supporters like you that are supporting the long-term sustainability of the show. So thank you, John. And dear listener, if you want to join the Patreon community, get exclusive access into my research and personal exploration, then you can head on over to patreon.com/modernanarchypodcast, also linked in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, Please know that I am sending you all my love, and let's tune in to today's episode. And the first question that I like to ask each guest is, how would you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Ooh. I am a little creature. I am just like, I'm someone who's connecting and discovering with my voice and my light through psychedelic body work um, and relationship anarchy and the freedom and the flow and movement that like allows me. I feel like I'm just like a little creature in the desert vibrating and pulsing with all of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm freedom embodied. I'm gender play. I'm really sensitive.
Good.
Um, what else? So I go by Miles, or a lot of people call me Miles, but my birth name is Mary Kathleen. I was named after my great grandmother, and I still really feel a lot of power in that name.
Mm,
But Miles, the name Miles came to me because I do long distance motorcycle rides to visit friends across the country.
cool.
And like I check in with how many miles away I am because what is time?
Right.
I sent you that email because I didn't know what time zone I'm in because I'm an Arizonan. So yeah, I I like the idea that miles is this arbitrary assignment of measure for this like arbitrary assignment of gender that I've been kind of
Mhm.
put on with since I started, growing facial hair and like showing more masculinity. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's who I am.
Yeah, well, welcome into the space. Thank you for trusting me and joining me for a relationship anarchy conversation.
Ooh, yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
yeah, these are some of my favorite conversations. So I'm so excited to see where our brains go and just the power of these conversations for the movement.
Yeah, thank you. They've been incredibly powerful to listen to.
Mm.
Um, really deeply healing and opening and expanding for me. So I'm delighted to be able to contribute my voice to the conversation. Thank
So
you.
cool. So cool. Yeah, there's like a level of seenness that I don't always get in all conversations out in the real world, even the podcast recording. So to be with another relationship anarchist, there's some sort of seenness there that is really healing, I feel like every time. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Well,
Amazing.
yeah. Well, the first big question, what is relationship anarchy?
Oh, wow. To me, it's just this open, expansive, vast space, just the universe. It is the entire universe. Which if that seems overwhelming, I could understand that. But to me, it feels safe. It
Yeah.
feels like, there's space for all of me, my whole range. Like everything belongs here in relationship anarchy. It all belongs. And that is all of my insecurities, all of my fears, all of my soul connection. It all belongs here. And gosh, I think I wrote to you in my responses about tying this kind of ethereal, like everything concept to a physical activity.
Yeah.
And that physical embodiment for me, it really resembles what it's like to paraglide, to fly with wind medicine in the sky and sky medicine. And relationship anarchy is its own medicine of freedom. And so, yeah, I want to like just kind of take my time and like go into paragliding because it's so special to me. But
Mm-hmm.
this embodiment, it feels like you take that risk and you jog off that hill or that sea cliff or wherever you may be, and you let the wind take you. You don't go down, you go up. You go up into the sky, into these beautiful vistas that you could never even imagine. That's not to say that it's not scary and that it doesn't take skill. It takes
Sure.
a lot of skill,
Yeah.
and a lot of time and a lot of like perfect weather days,
Right. Right.
But that is the embodiment for me
Mm.
is painting the sky with this big colorful wing and just taking it all in and being so present in the moment. You have to be present with everything when you're up flying in the air, right? Um, and when you're engaging with a partner, when your souls are connecting, like you have to be present, brings you to presence.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, such a beautiful metaphor. Yeah. I've always, talked about my relationships like rock climbing or
Hmm.
yoga, right? Because those are my movement practices. And so when I saw your response with paragliding, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I've never done that before. I could see how this is all related.
Oh my gosh. I don't want to try too hard to recruit you, but I just want to extend the invitation. The wind medicine, the sky medicine, it's always there. It's waiting for you. And I think I live in the Bay Area right now, but I'm moving back to Arizona. But while I'm in the Bay Area, amazing place to learn,
I'm
amazing place to
sure.
connect with those elements and see how it's just so interesting how these body practices, these movement practices like align with the like ethereal inside of you and kind of like
Mhm.
bring things into connection. Um,
Sure. Yeah, there's
yeah.
that saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? So I think
Yeah.
yeah, I think that can come through in terms of particularly things that require trusting yourself or challenge or being with a set of variables that are out of your control, right? All of that sort of stuff, how you are in relationship with that can mirror out to a lot of different things. So I can totally see that. And when you say it as the whole universe, yeah, I'm sure maybe some relationship anarchists are like, yeah, man, like I get it. Like that's totally it. And other ones are like, what are you saying? But I feel that. I think that it's sometimes when people ask me what is relationship anarchy, I was like, well, what is it not? But
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
on where you're looking at it. And I think when I hear you say that, what I'm thinking about is how I am a being that is created by and through relationships, right? This language that is coming out of
Mm.
my body right now is a language that was created before me by other people. Everything I have in my space right now, is created by or through with other humans and nature and this earth. And when you think about my community, and then my broader community, and then the world, and the impacts that we have, the small little ripples, the ways that I am connected to people, I'm connected to drugs, right? All this sort of stuff, what are we not in relationship with? And hence where I go, it's everything. But if you say that to someone who's never heard it before, they're like, what is this girl talking about? So I think that, it's really seeing how far we can really examine our relationships and power and narrative and structures. And in that sense, I see that, yes, being climate change, relationships, drug liberation, sexual liberation. Oh, yeah, 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 the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, gosh, thank you so much for like that really helped kind of like encapsulate and ground it. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I sometimes am like, oh gosh, I'm so far out there on these things that I'm wonder like where the threads will like kind of,
Sure,
where the lightning will like actually strike the ground.
sure.
But you really pulled it together, so thank you. Yeah,
Of course, of course. And I think that's
beautiful.
the joy of like connecting with another person with similar paradigms. You have to you get to explain less. You get to run further,
Yeah.
more miles, and all of them are important. It is fun to also slow down and be with
Hmm.
someone and say like, "Hey, yeah," and there's a lot of like values grounding in that moment even when someone challenges you and says I don't like that or I don't believe that there can be moments of a lot of growth there too. And also, when you find someone from a similar like resonance and paradigm, the amount of space that you can traverse in that time is much further. And so, being able to be in a space where we kind of see that similar outlook, I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, there's a proverb or saying it's if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Mm. Sweet. Very, very
Yeah, and
sweet.
I like that. I like that.
Hmm. And so, how do you practice relationship anarchy? I know. How do you do it?
Okay, that one seems a little bit more like I can kind of
Ground it?
like,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, I can kind of like look at like
Yeah.
my path and like the guardrails that have
Hmm.
been on my path and be like, okay, yeah, I'm a little bit more in the know as opposed to like just really acknowledging how much I don't know about the
Sure.
entirety of it. But yeah, so how I practice it, feel like you were mentioning before, it's been like I am a being, like I am a being that is feeling and breathing and living and growing, and this is just a part of my nature. And I haven't had the language until recently, the last like 5 years, to kind of start to put those little blocks together, the blocks of language together to like
Sure.
share with other people. But yeah, it has always kind of been in me. And the ways I practice it, I have a partner, a nesting partner, if you will. I don't know these words. We live together, and she's amazing. She also paraglides.
Cool.
She came to paragliding outside of our relationship, and then we connected with it.
Nice.
And so I've been living with her. We've only been together for like about a year, but it was just when you know, I guess. And what do I know? I know that our souls are connected.
Mm,
We don't really need like kind of any other label than that. So we're
sure.
non-hierarchical. We don't, put boundaries on who we can love or how we can love. We just make the space to communicate about it, make the space to talk and share and be vulnerable and put it all out there. And so I do that with with them, and I also leave that place in Oakland. I leave that place for the whole summer, like a quarter of the year, and I come back to Arizona and I prioritize my relationship with my niece and with my family. And so my niece, I was pretty much the big, like almost the primary caregiver in her life from like 2 to 4, a
Hmm.
lot going on
Sure.
with her biological parents that time. And then I moved her into my parents' house. So now she lives with my parents who are 77 and 74, and she's now 17. And so there's a 60-year age gap. And
Wow.
I come back during the summer, I give everyone a little break from each other. And I take her
Sure.
dirt biking up in Flagstaff, Arizona, and we spend a lot of time just being in nature on dirt bikes. And I feel like motorcycles are another kind of medicine too.
Sure.
And so I do what I need to do to like, make sure that I have the space to do that. I open up that space. I give her as much of it as she wants. She's got a boyfriend in Tucson, Arizona, and so she's wanting to spend a lot of time with him. So it's like, I'm here. You can take as much as you want.
Yeah.
I practice it in these really intimate relationships I have with my friends who I spend time with in the summer and who I like I move into their house and live with them. And right now, I'm currently in one of my dearest friends' houses because my parents are having solar installed, and so the power was out. I was like, oh, I have to go somewhere else for this. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Carmen's house we go. And so,
Nice.
yeah, I feel like a very deep soul connection with Carmen, and we do a lot of medicine work together. And she's shared so much wisdom with me.
Mm.
So I prioritize that relationship. And yeah, I practice it in just kind of shedding off these scripted traditions or like peer pressure from dead people. Who needs those scripts? Like, I, I
Yeah.
who were they actually working for? They're not working for
Right.
me. So I
Right.
practice it in just like having a good shed of that
Mhm.
and continuing to do that. That's a process, right?
Yes.
Shedding is always a process. And so I continue to do that whenever I'm called to by being present with my feelings and having the conversations and letting myself be drawn to the relationships that fill me up and fulfill me, and then
Mm.
letting that process then flow out of me.
Yeah.
I think that is my practice of it as it
Yeah.
stands right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so important to talk about the different ways that relationship anarchy impacts all of our relationships. I think that sometimes people can think it's about sexual and romantic freedom and all of that, which is, it's funny because it's almost the kind of opposite. It's not necessarily the opposite, but really
deeper into what does it mean to not value the sexual and romantic over the platonic. So in that inherent deconstruction, it means it's about all of our relationships. But I think that sometimes, depending on your lens, if you came from like the non-monogamy world, you might see it through that of like, oh, it's a space where people just do whatever they want. Like we can get into the whole, assumptions and the whole world of it all. But really, when you get into the practice, when you learn more about anarchy in general, it's about community. It's about all of these different relationships. And so, yeah, it's about your partner, it's about your friend, it's about your parents, it's about your niece, it's about all of these people. And how can we be present and intentional in those relationships? And you talked a little bit about shedding different scripts. I'd be curious, are any scripts coming to mind that have particularly stood out for you?
Oh, certainly. And scripts that like were traumatizing, right?
Yeah.
Like deeply traumatizing.
Yes.
Um, yeah, the oh, I also wanted to backtrack a little bit
Hmm.
and also mention like I practice relationship anarchy in my prioritization of self too. Like
Sure.
my relationship with myself is really important. But yeah, like back to the shedding social scripts and the trauma of that, like marriage. And that's a tricky one for me because the script that I had from my parents was they have been married 54 years this year.
Mm.
On my parents' 52nd wedding anniversary, my dad had gone into the hospital and he had a tumor on his auditory nerve, and it
Oh,
was kind of half in
no.
his ear and half in his brain.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is kind of a little bit intense, but it has like a really
I'm here
nice
for
little
it.
bow
Yeah.
on it. Okay. But yeah, so yeah, back in August of 2022, my grandmother passed away. I had a very close relationship with her. My grandmother passed away. 4 days later, my dad went to the hospital for this surgery. My parents kind of thought that it was going to be like an in and out thing. They're like, oh, he just can't drive for 2 weeks. No, that's like a legal statement. That's not a medical statement. It's like the recovery is going to be longer than 2 weeks.
Oh,
They just are
wow.
telling you like don't operate heavy machinery.
Yeah.
But he ended up having complications and he was in the hospital for almost 2.5 months.
Wow.
Um, he had water on the brain, pressure on the brain, and basically his brain just like went into this mode where it was producing like way too much cerebral spinal fluid. And so he just was like saying things that didn't start in the right place, didn't end in the right place. Yeah, a lot of unknowns of like, are we gonna get him back? Like, is he
Mm.
gonna come out of this?
So tough.
Um, yeah, and so yeah, my grandmother passed away, then he went into the hospital, he stayed in the hospital, and during this time, my grandfather also was passing away.
Mm.
My grandmother was 88, my grandfather was 94, and they took care of each other pretty much until the end. And then when my grandmother was passing away, like he just wanted to be there for her, and then he's like, peace, I'm out. Like
Yeah, it's really
my
common.
heart is with her. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was really beautiful. Like that's so beautiful. And so that's a version of the script of marriage that I got, right?
Hmm.
And that was so beautiful and I could appreciate that during that time. And also like so that was my mom's parents. And so my mom was dealing with losing her mom, her dad, and her husband was in this like really wild limbo place.
Sure.
And so she showed up every day from the entire visiting span that she was allowed to be there at the hospital. She advocated for him over and over again. And the hospital system is insane. It's
Mm.
like if you have like a small margin of improvement, you're out of the ICU, you're into a skilled nursing place or a
Yeah.
rehab place. So they were just moving him around and moving him around, and he wasn't getting better. He like literally could not make any sense of anything.
Hmm.
Like, and they're like, oh, what was he like before? Well, he could have a complete sentence. So,
Yeah. Tough.
like,
So tough.
yeah. And so it took a lot of faith that my mom exhibited to be like, no, I'm getting him back. Like, we're
Mm.
gonna get through this.
Yeah.
And so their 52nd wedding anniversary, he was in a hospital room in an ICU room at Barrow Neurological Institute in Arizona. And from his hospital room, it overlooked the spot where they first met.
Oh.
And I thought like, oh, to have a life partner like that, where you just have journeyed and so lovingly through all of this, and 52 years later, you're like just caring for each other. in the ways that you can and showing up and being present and continuing to be present, even though the unknowns are so great and there's,
Mhm.
loss and death happening around that also need to be attended to. And so what a beautiful example, and like what an amazing example of that kind of like deep loyal marriage bond,
Yeah.
right? And they're very traditional, like they're very like square.
Sure. Yeah.
But anyway, my dad, they finally figured out like he needed like a low pressure shunt. I don't know how it works. I was knitting away. That's all I could do is go to his hospital room and knit and be
Yeah.
present through like
Yeah.
knitting. But they finally figured it out. And then so like the last surgery he had happened at 9 o'clock at night, and then 11 o'clock the next morning, complete sentences, totally fine,
Good.
just like insane. He lost like 65 pounds from being in the hospital for
Wow.
like 2.5 months. And so my mom, she just showed me like, wow, this is real partnership. This is real being there
Mm.
with your love and with your connection with somebody else. And so it's not like I had like bad scripts in front of me, right? I had amazing lifelong love stories, but they're just not for me. Like that kind of model is not for me. But when I was younger, kind of got a little scared by like emerging queerness, and I just
Sure.
went right into a relationship that was just really bad, like really traumatic,
Mm.
really abusive. And the abusive stuff started like very subtly and insidiously,
Yeah.
but like financial control, like isolation, and then just wild stuff having to do with like sleep, kind of like sleep terrorism.
Sure.
So I was engaged to this man, and we got engaged after like, I don't know, like 4 weeks or something. Just like stupid
Hmm.
quick, like radically
Yeah.
like not right. But it was all kind of based in like this fear of queerness. And like
Mm.
I don't have that script. Like I don't have that script. I just
Sure.
have the script that my parents had,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure,
Like
sure,
had
sure.
laid out for me. So the fear of the unknown like kind of led me into this like, oh, well, this is what I should do kind of place. And yeah, he was just a quite unwell person, and yeah, there's a lot of abuse and a lot of trauma, and then finally it became like overtly physical.
Mm.
And I was almost thankful for that because it was like, okay, like that is the line, right? It just seemed more of a line to me, more of a boundary to be crossed when
Sure.
that happened. And so yeah, I just was like, well, I'm out of here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Probably being okay with my queerness is probably better than like dying from domestic violence, I
Right.
guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Low line, but yes. It's okay. You're here now. You're here now.
yeah,
It's a
yeah. That was a
journey.
long time ago. Yeah. And so yeah, that was definitely like a script that I've had to shed and to kind of now kind of reopen to, because
Mm.
in my partnership with her name's Kelly, with my partnership with Kelly, we kind of say like, oh, we never want to get married. And like part of that is from this experience when I was younger, when I was engaged to this
Sure,
person.
sure, sure, sure.
And I'm like, well, I just don't need that. I don't need, this acknowledgement or this structure to like validate, how I'm connecting with you and how I choose to, and each day step into that connection, right? But we want to, like,
Yeah,
like
sure.
we're like having these conversations about like actually really wanting to touch on this and wanting to like practice it. So we're gonna
Yeah.
like have like a little practice marriage thing
Cute.
ceremony just to ourselves like this summer, and just see how it feels and like write our own script to it.
Yeah.
But I'm finding when we say like, oh, we're never gonna do that. We're never gonna get into that. That's kind of indicating like where the healing
Huh.
is, pointing towards, right? Like that's like, oh, we're gonna put that in our past. We are not done shedding that, right?
Mm,
So
yeah.
again, the shedding process is like a constant, continuous, like evolving thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like the biggest relationship anarchy thing we can do is to write our own narrative about all of it, right? And so to
Hmm.
say that I don't want marriage with the historical roots of property and ownership over someone to pass down your lineage and wealth. I don't like that. I don't want to be walked down the aisle to be given away by my father as the property that I used to be in the previous historical times. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you get the right to say that part of it doesn't resonate with me, but the celebration of love, the
Hmm.
tax benefits to say fuck the system, right? Like all this stuff that resonates for you, that's like the most relationship anarchy thing to do is to say, like, hey, I
Hmm.
don't like these scripts, but these scripts, and this is why I'm doing it, and this is what this word means to me. If I want to call someone my partner, great. What does that word mean? If I want to call them my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my person, what does it mean, right? It's not that the words, the labels are bad. It's specifically unpacking what those words and labels mean for you. Ride the
Hmm.
relationship escalator with consciousness and intentionality. There is nothing
Yes.
wrong with riding the escalator. It is, do you know that you could have other relationships that are meaningful that don't ride them, and that your relationship is not somehow less meaningful because you reconfigure, because you stop having sex, because you stop living together? That doesn't mean that your relationship is any less valuable. So it's really, yeah, so much about that freedom, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you just are so good at like coming
Ah!
around and encapsulating it. I love it.
My
Yeah,
student
and
loans, man, they've given me some good skills. My good student loans.
yeah, um yeah, the conscious conversation, the conscious choice, the respecting autonomy, the respecting agency, the putting it all out there. The it feels safe. That feels safe. When it's a script and it feels like there's that pressure, that's not safe. That doesn't feel like
Mhm.
safety to me. And so yeah, moving into a space where my partner is kind of like, oh, I don't know. I'm having these feelings of being like mine, like you are mine. And I'm not comfortable with those feelings. Like I need the freedom. I need the like space. And I want that for you too, but I'm feeling myself like want to like claim it, claim you. And
Mhm.
I'm like, well, that I think that's okay too, like that's okay. Like we do have these conversations. We do have the respect for each other's agency. And if that's coming up, it's coming up in safety and in
Yeah.
this protected open space. So that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that we do that in other relationships. This is my friend, right? And there
Mm,
is an understanding to what that means of closeness, of mindness. And in that relationship, I mean, I would say in healthy friendships, we don't then say you can't do other things with other people, even though you are my friend. There is
mm-hmm.
closeness and mindness in the attachment that we share, but that attachment is not also connected to a deep level of control over what that person does with their life. And we somehow so easily seem to just flow with that in platonic relationships. And then the second it gets to the sex and romance thing, everything gets so complicated. Right. And I think that's where it takes
Yeah.
that deeper understanding that me, you, we are the products of our environment. And so all of the historical context, the systems are so deeply internalized. And so it is an active dance to say, wow, I am having these desires. I'm noticing that they are not in alignment with my value systems. Both are happening at the same time right now. I'm going to work through the discomfort to get closer to my value system, and that is something that we're going to do for the rest of our lives. And I pray that the future generations will come into a world of even more liberation than we can even dream of in this current context?
Uh, I pray for that too,
Yeah,
especially for my niece. Yeah.
right. Totally. And I think it's, like honoring the generational differences, the cultural differences that is age or
Hmm.
even different locations in the world, right? Particularly when I think about, I guess I'm thinking about my family. So my mom didn't go to college. I was the first person to go to undergrad, and my grandma didn't finish high school. She would not be happy that I'm saying that, but I don't think she listens to the podcast. And in her eyes, if I talked to her about education, she'd say like, "Well, I didn't want it. I didn't need it. Why would I have graduated high school or gone to college? I was a mom, right? And I think there's some level of respect for that, of like, okay, you were following
Mhm.
your pleasure. And also a little bit of critical examination of what was presented for my grandmother at that time in terms of possibilities,
Access.
right?
Yeah, access.
Yeah. So she was happy. She lived her life. And so we're not going to discredit that pleasure that she
Sure.
found. And also, as a feminist, I'm going to be raging up in here that she couldn't have a credit card until 1970s and that education wasn't as accessible. So yeah, I think when I hear your stories about yeah, your grandma and your parents and all of us, we see these models and now we're also living in a time where way more access is possible. And so how can we respect the
Mhm.
pleasure that they found in their paradigms and also be sitting in ours now saying, wow, this is a bit of a different game and where do we want to go with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And my parents have never put that pressure on me. My grandparents
Mm,
never put that pressure on me. It was something that came from like outside, this like social sea, the soup that we're in, you know?
yeah,
But my grandma has always like when she was alive, she always wanted to learn from me and like wanted to kind of like ride on my wings, you know?
sure. Yeah.
And my parents too, they're always like so like how's the journey? Like tell me
Yeah.
about your journey.
Yeah.
And that's such a privilege to have that kind of lineage of unconditional love and acceptance that they just want to see you. And I know I'm super fucking lucky to
Mm,
get that.
yeah.
It's a huge privilege. It's probably one of the biggest privilege you could be born into. And even still with that like really strong lineage, there's so much social
I'm
soup and it's
sure.
sticky and it's
Yes.
hard to shed.
Absolutely. And so I think that's where a level of mindfulness about the fact that
Mhm.
we're gonna have responses and we are not defined by that initial response, right? And that initial
Mm,
reaction we have to take responsibility in that, of course, but don't define yourself by that initial response. Define yourself by how you align to your value systems. So when
mm,
I was first particularly trying to practice like expansive relationships where I did not control my partner's experience of eroticism and pleasure with other people, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And hearing about them just dancing, let's be very clear, just dancing with someone I know, just dancing with someone else at a club. And my stomach is turning, I'm crying, and I'm going, fuck, like, how do I want to be here? But my body is reacting with such fear. Oh my God. Right. And so I think that just having a little bit of that observer's mindset to say, hey, it is valid that I am crying. I have been socially conditioned for years and years that the only way to find exclusivity is through control. And so to get outside of that, I am having a trauma response to the systems that have been so deeply internalized. And I can have compassion for myself. And I can know I want to move over here into values. And so I'm going to take that step towards that of moving through the discomfort to get closer in alignment with my values.
beautiful. Yeah, and again, it all belongs here. It all belongs. The whole process of that, it all belongs.
Yeah, and we do that with other systems of oppression where you have to acknowledge that even when you think you're not a part of the problem, you are, right? Right. The second that you think, I don't have that internalized ism, don't talk to me, I'm fine. That's when I'm more scared, where I'm like, okay, time to
You
really
just
open up the eyes. Yeah.
don't see it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's that continual embrace of like, okay, where can I examine how this is going? Of course, live into your pleasure too. Don't just spend every single day like examining and digging and digging and digging and digging. But where's that balance in that of like, okay, I'm
Mhm.
right here and there's more. I'm proud of where I've come. I get a lot of clients who are like, oh, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I suck. And I'm like, dear client,
Oh.
please look at all that you have climbed. Please look at all that you've, flown, right? Like you're in such a
Hmm.
different landscape than before. And I know you're
Mm.
still looking up at who you want to be, which is such a great indication of your values. How beautiful that you see that and you're still
Hmm.
like, damn, I'm not there. But also celebrate yourself in that. Like, where's the balance of growth and celebration at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, I was as I was getting set up for this call, I was
Hmm.
talking to Carmen and I was like, "Ooh, nervous."
Sure.
And she's like,
Yeah.
"Because you care so much. Because you care so
Yeah.
much. Not because you're not, exactly where you need to be or you're not there yet. It's just because you care. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot there. It's just moving an energy through you. So yeah,
Yeah. So
it's
powerful.
beautiful.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That was one of the biggest things I feel like I learned when I was in therapy before becoming a therapist was honoring all of my anxious feelings as an indication of how much something meant to me.
Mm-hmm.
Oof. Yeah, when you
Special.
sit
It's
with that,
special.
whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, and they actually belong in there. You're not trying to get rid of that anxiety. It belongs. And instead of trying to like shoo it away or get rid of it, maybe send it some love. Give it some
Mhm.
space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm curious, why do you practice relationship anarchy? Why is this important to you? Yeah, let's go for it.
Uh, it's a need. It's a need. I
Yeah,
need it. Like I need it. It's not a desire. It's deeply based in need. It's in my bones that I need it. If I'm not having that freedom, if I'm closed off, if my heart is closed, if I'm not able to heal through this, I actually develop like a lot of somatic responses, like
sure. Good.
very like
Good.
sensory overwhelm for like everything. Textures on my face, like I can't even be like if I get like a drop of something on me, I need to be either completely wet or completely dry. Like it's wild sensory things that I don't need to understand. All I need to know is that those sensory things are my guardrails on my path, and my path
Mhm.
is towards freedom. And I need that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
So
so powerful.
that's actually like a really simple like answer to that question. It's just a
Sure.
need.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to be able to be your authentic self, to have the
Hmm.
freedom. And then I think one of the biggest things about that is your connection to the body. I mean, oh, the field of psychology, my 5 years of doctoral training and not a single class on the body. Of course, I take a neuropsychology class and we talk about cortisol, we talk about adrenaline, we talk about how that impacts you, your stress response, but not a single class as a therapist of, hey, how are you going to work with your clients when they're in that state? What should you do with that body when you're Oh my God. So thank God for my psychedelic training, where, of course, you can imagine in a psychedelic space, that stuff's even more intense. So obviously, there was a very grounded training in somatic therapy that I'm so grateful to have had because it now has such a lens to everything that I do. And I think that any healer should really have, right? Is how can we be so connected to our bodies that when something is out of alignment, we notice it and we notice it
Mm,
hard. And I think that it's tricky because, particularly in our society, there is so much that puts us into a state of misalignment and inauthentic expression that we're constantly holding that in our body. I hate this job. I have the Sunday scaries. I have to show up on Monday. Yeah, I hate the system too. Capitalism. Whoa. But like, how inauthentic, how disconnected from your body do you have to be to show up at that job every single day and chug so much coffee so that you don't hate it? Oh my, you see what I'm saying? Wow. Whoa,
yeah,
whoa, whoa.
yeah.
Okay. So I think that's hence why I find like particularly like the idea of eroticism and pleasure and somatic joy and sexuality to be one of the most radical revolutionary practices because the more we can get people back into their bodies and back into feeling pleasure, I think the more you automatically feel that misalignment and misattunement.
Yeah. Even just like going through that was really overwhelming for me.
Yeah, you're like, I've been there, I've had that job. Hey, I have had that job. Let me tell you. Let me tell
Oh my
you.
God. I don't
Let
I
me
even
tell
think I can get
you.
into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, well, gosh, I guess it's coming up.
Yeah,
Might as
sure.
well. One, I want to make the recommendation to go to massage school.
Sure.
Fucking amazing. It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah,
You get worked on like so much in massage school. It's part of the learning process.
cool.
And that was huge for me. I really
Sure.
enjoyed that. But yeah, yeah, I've had that job right when MDMA therapy found me, rather.
Sure.
I was working at a flash in the pan startup. Actually, it's made it an incredibly horrendous impact on the world. Is I was an office manager, and I actually worked for somebody who recently was sent to prison for over
Oof.
25 years for a massive fraud. It's like
Whoa.
probably the largest fraud in the history of man.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
And I needed that job. I
Right.
needed it for the healthcare. Like
Right.
I would do anything for the fucking healthcare
Yep.
and
Isn't that wild?
anything for the healthcare.
Uh, talk about
And
control. Mm.
yeah, I know. Yeah. And so the healthcare that I needed was I needed to have a hysterectomy. I needed to like get my ovaries out of my body. And I needed to do that for myself. And so I just needed to hold down this crazy ass job working for this person in crypto. And
Yeah.
as soon as I did that, menopause, this like churn of chemicals in my body, like, and the lack of chemicals and the shedding of that was a huge, like, intense time. And yeah, and so then therapy found me after that, and I was still in this role as
Mm.
like office manager for this
Hmm.
place. And I on the Friday before the MDMA therapy, the CEO, who's now in prison, took me into his office, and he was like, "Hey, so I'm getting a sense that you're not really that happy here, like you're not really that comfortable here, and I'm just wondering, like, is there anything we can kind of do to give you a sense of control over your life and like bring you back to a good place?"
Yeah.
And I was really honest with him. I was like, you know what? I'm doing MDMA therapy this weekend. Let me get back to you on Monday.
Yeah.
And you know this. They tell you like, don't quit your job, don't make any big financial decisions, like don't,
Yeah.
yada yada yada. But I it was a soft firing, right? Like he was opening the conversation to like, you know,
Yeah.
get the fuck out because
Sure.
the energy from you is homicidal almost.
Sure.
Like that
Sure.
is menopause energy, or was in my body. I was like, I could go nuclear on people. I was really not trying to. Like it's just that was what was coming out of me.
Right.
And so yeah, I went through the therapy and I came out the went to work and just immediately was like, yeah, I got to get out of here. I need to go.
Mm.
And he was like, oh, do you want to quit or do you want to be fired? I was like, please fire me. Thank you.
Sure.
Like,
Sure.
yeah, and it was what I needed to do. It
Sure.
released so much of that. Like I needed to like not be there. I needed to be doing something else and moving along my path. And I was scared to like let go of that security of having access to healthcare.
Sure.
And yeah, so those somatic responses and like
Are
having
very
it
real.
intertwined with like capitalism and
Oh,
working and
yeah.
like caring for yourself.
Right.
Woof.
Oof. Deep. Yeah, deep.
Yeah.
Yep. There's no end to that question of what a different world it would be if we lived in a structure where at minimum the profits from healthcare, let's just start there. The profits from healthcare, our ability to live in our bodies with health were redistributed to the people rather than private companies. Like let's at least that one, folks. Like it is so wild to me that wasn't always the system until very recently. So all of us our age are like, oh yeah, this is normal, right? No, this was not always the
No.
case prior to this very recent time where medical care got privatized. And just it's interesting. Like we had started our recording right with consent conversations about coming
Mhm.
into the space. What a wild consent question that if you want to live in America and be safe enough to not fear going to the ER because of a life or death emergency that could put you into a bankruptcy. So, because of that fear, because there's no universal health care, you need to get a job. What kind of consent is that? Like, you can't bankruptcy and an ER. Whoa, like it is astronomical to me to think. There's a lot of different things about capitalism, but really the fact that like so many of us, me, my friends, all of my student friends say, hey, if something happens to me, call the Uber, do not put me in the ambulance because I cannot afford the ambulance there. Like that is crazy. What world do we live in? Oh my God, and the second you start looking at different countries, you're like, oh shit, like America is behind.
Yeah, and what's coming
Um,
to mind is like
oh,
you're talking about, like a maybe thing that might happen, like if something happens to your health, but something is going to happen to our health. We're aging. We're aging. It's going to happen, and our system for aging is based in capitalism too, and that's, I mean,
I know.
it's wild. Yeah, like that's it's not consent. It's not
Oh
consent.
my God.
And
Yeah.
so my partner and I have had these kind of like fantastical conversations about like our quote unquote retirement plan.
Sure.
And for us, it's paragliding until we
Mm.
cannot possibly paraglide anymore, which you can
Oh,
paraglide until you're quite old, because I know some quite old paragliders and they're
cool.
amazing. But yeah, paragliding until we just almost couldn't do another launch and
Yeah.
take a one more flight over the Pacific and into the ocean. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's my idea of a retirement plan, because that has consent in it. That
Sure.
has freedom. That has returning to the earth
Yeah.
and becoming again part of the just the flow of
Sure.
energy into other
Yeah.
things, which we don't allow for that in capitalism. We just allow hierarchical accumulation, and also with that money, sickness flows with that money. Like people accumulating that wealth are not well. You don't become a billionaire with wellness. Like that is the burden of not knowing when enough is enough. And I don't wish that on anybody. I have a
Hmm.
lot of compassion for people who are in those echelons, because they're dealing with stuff, and it's impacting us. If those
Yeah.
people were to heal, we would all heal too. And so I have a lot of compassion for them.
Sure. Yeah. 49% of the world's wealth is owned by the 1%. Fun facts. Fun facts we can all sit with as a global society. Woohoo. Crazy. Um, And before we get way too far into the universe of
Yeah.
relationship anarchy, I'm curious, how does your relationship anarchy impact your practice of intimacy?
Oh, just so many more conversations. And I feel like conversations are the main line to connection and main line to like deep intimacy. And deep intimacy is an avenue, like it goes from like a thread to a string to a rope to a street of connection. And yeah, so you follow that from, communication to intimacy, vulnerability, and sex and pleasure. And yeah, it's just deepened everything. It's made me realize I'm a lot more demisexual than I ever thought. I always knew I can be pretty like wild and like kinky, and I don't know. I think kinky is just it kind of others these sexual
Sure.
practices.
Yes.
And I like to think that that's just we can all be like we're all just creatures, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
So
Kinky is anything that's not normative, not normal. So who's defining the box of normative
yeah,
and normal? And
yeah,
when BDSM is some of the highest reported fantasies, it's pretty normal, it's
yeah.
so, my friends, how far do we want to spin that one? But yeah, I agree what you're saying. I think that it's important to dismantle the box of normality. And so then that means that the word kinky could take on very different meanings to all of that. And so, yeah, I see all the different ways that, there's just so many different systems that are internalized that are preventing us from accessing our pleasure. And I think that one of the biggest transformative things for me, which I would love to hear how it's been for you in terms of intimacy, is the ways in which you step into a community. Maybe it starts with one person or you found the big community first, but that person introduces you to other people who introduce you to other people. And then you start to run into these people who are vulnerable, who are authentic, who can have difficult conversations with you and sit down and be present, be in their bodies as they have those conversations, to hold space for you, to be there on the tough days, to celebrate with you. And you start to step into a very different community that when you look back on, you realize maybe that's the biggest piece of change ever, is really changing the people in your close inner circle. Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just sat for 3 nights in Tucson with an ayahuasca church,
Hmm.
and talk about community digging into their vulnerability
Sure.
and sharing that. Not really sharing that with like words, but just with energy and with light. And
Yeah.
gosh, okay, could you bring me back to the question again?
Sure. Yeah. I'm essentially I'm asking you, how has your community shaped you? How has it changed over the
Oh, sure.
years?
Sure. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so it's slowly, like really slowly. As my community changes, it changes me. As I change my community. And so there's that like, kind of infinity shape of a flow going to it.
Hmm.
Some of my friends, our relationships have deepened in intimacy, and I hand them one piece of my healing. I hand off just by me attending to my own heart.
Hmm.
And that allows them to take that and attend to their own heart. And then they get something more out of that and they give that back to me. And
Yeah.
that constant exchange that's not transactional, that's interconnected in community. And that brings me again back to this church, this it's called the Arizona Yage Assembly. And the lead facilitator really believes in each person attending to their own heart heals the group. And just watching those threads kind of go out and then come back to you
Yeah.
is so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beyond to
Hmm.
witness that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Sauna Healing Collective, where I did my psychedelic integration therapy training, their like saying is community is medicine. And that has always yeah,
Yes.
really resonated with me that yeah, you could do all of the medicine work in the world and it would not change anything. It's about who you're with in that circle. And of course,
Hmm.
we
In
always talk
connection.
about, yeah, and we always talk about the set and setting, right? And I think
Hmm.
that, we get the setting, that's a big part of it. And then everything I've learned about psychology tells me that the set is created by your setting, so then it's like, okay, how do we even define the two and get outside them? I mean, I've had lots of conversations with Dr. Jeff Beachy about that of like, okay, the set is you, your person, yourself. And I'm always like, yeah, but that's in relation, Jeff. Like he's like, yeah, and then setting is anything external. I'm like, okay, fine, but like you're saying, the infinity
Oh
sign
yeah.
of that, of like, where does that end? Where does it begin? What a great question, And I don't think we have to define it. It's a yes and. And so sitting
Hmm.
in that, I think, is a really important piece. And so being able to, at least for me, one of the biggest things when I think about intimacy too is the way in which, particularly the deeper I go into deconstructing scripts around sexuality and pleasure, one, the
Hmm.
slower I move. Wow,
Oh
like so slow
yeah.
now. Whoa. And then also the ways in which my desires for intimacy and connection and vulnerability are present in my relationships, regardless of who I'm having sex with. I used to live in this world where sex meant deep emotional connection, and now sex means something very beautiful and play. And I've realized that I can have that deep emotional connection with multiple people, and that my choice to engage in sex is one aspect of intimacy rather than the aspect of intimacy. It is one facet of that. And so I feel so much more intimacy in all my different relationships by dismantling that like nebulous power that it had, which was, I think, so much of like unprocessed desires for closeness and intimacy that you could also meet in other ways in your life, but we've just given it such this power. And so I don't want
Hmm.
to say that sex is less important to me. It's if anything more important. But what I've learned is that that's not the only way to have valuable intimacy.
Yeah, it's like discovering other flavors, right?
Sure.
It's
Yeah. And
it's
they're all so
just
tasty.
yeah.
Whoa.
You just eating the fruit when it's ripe?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of different kinds of fruit. Like sex is just one kind of fruit.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm curious too, what are some of the difficulties that you've experienced with the relationship anarchy? Yeah.
Oh, the difficulties are the thing, like the things that I love about it too. Like
Sure. What's a bad trip
everything,
on
yeah,
psychedelics,
yeah.
right? Eh, yeah, it was
Everything
challenging.
is a everything is a true paradox, right? Like I'm grateful for the difficulties because they
Right.
bring me to presence. And
Hmm.
presence is the difficult thing. So I have the gratitude for the difficulties, and I have just a lot of like awe in the paradox of it. The difficulties are you have to be so freaking present, like so absolutely like right here, right now, that you know, your mind might even spin off a script in like the 0.2 seconds that you were drifting away from presence, you know? So yeah, it's difficult. That's difficult. It's very challenging.
Hmm.
But I have so much gratitude for that, and I love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think so many of the scripts have this paradigm of you're with this person till you die, right? And so we start to see all the way out to that world, so much so that we don't value anything that ends shorter, right? So I think that's an important thing for people to
Oh
examine
yeah.
the ways of like, hey, you had a beautiful, meaningful relationship for the time that that meant what it meant for the two of you. And then it was important for you guys to separate and go your other ways. And that's beautiful, right? And so
Hmm.
dismantling that assumption that the only way we can have a meaningful relationship is that we make it to our own deathbeds together, right? So
Mm.
that, and remembering too that, like we said at the beginning of this conversation, there's nothing wrong with wanting that, right? The relationship
No,
escalates. It's
yeah.
beautiful. It's beautiful to say, I want to live my whole life with you.
It is beautiful. I've
And
seen it.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And in that, when change happens, or if the change happens in that desire, can you go with grace in that and
Mm.
understand that that also means it was still a meaningful relationship, even though there was change, right? So I think that it's exciting to dream about these worlds, but watching how far out your mind can go. Sometimes we get so far out into, we're going to be here, we're going to be doing this together, we're going to be doing that together, so much so they're not even in the present
Hmm.
moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, I've been there. I've been dreaming about relationships where they're giving me breadcrumbs in the moment, but I'm like, hey, eventually they're going to start showing up and we're going to be here, we're going to be down here, we're going to be doing this, we're walking down the aisle, we're going to live together with the kids and the white picket fence. It's going to be great. And then you like, when you actually pin back into the present moment, you're like, yeah, they're like not texting me back. Like they're not emotionally available. Like, but it's fine. We'll get there, you know? So it's like, just like, what does it mean to be in the present moment with the beauty of what's right here, to dream into the future, to get excited about the future, and in that, be in relationship with change? Things might change. Things might change. And how can I be present with that rather than holding on to scripts? Oof, that's a dance I'll learn for the rest of my life for sure.
Hey, yeah, and that brings me back to the song that I had us listen to
Yeah,
before
yeah, yeah.
opening this conversation. Hold your heart with grace.
Mm.
Don't forget the moment. Hold your heart with grace and open to the present. So yeah, absolutely. It's a challenge. It's a
Mhm.
beautiful, beautiful challenge.
Yeah. One of my partners and I have talked about the different storms that we move through when you're unpacking pleasure activism, because let me tell you, they are there with
Hmm.
everything that we're talking about, the ways that these systems are so deeply internalized. There are often days where my body responds in ways that I wish it was just chill. And similar practices like with you in paragliding for climbing, like lead climbing used to cause so much fear. Wow, I'm so proud that I used that word used to. That's you don't even know,
Mm,
but for me, that's a big dream.
cool.
Oh my gosh, just like I would go climb and like just I truly felt a trauma reaction in my body, even though nothing was actually like it was a safe space, but I would feel like dissociative, everything would get kind of blurry, hazy. I would have a full chest reaction, like so many things. So working through that through gentle exposure and oh my gosh, what a journey.
Mm,
And so again, like you, it's a metaphor that I see a lot of this through, of gentle exposure with safe
yeah.
partners, going slow to get to a
Oh my
space
God.
where things that used to scare me no longer do. But of course, there's crystal days when you're climbing outside and you're on a really intense route, to presume that you're never going to be scared again might mean that you're not climbing high enough or radical enough, questions. But
Or maybe you're, yeah, maybe you've drifted from presence even there, you know?
sure.
Like, but yeah, I think, yeah, again, coming back to the somatic responses,
Right.
back to your body, come back into your body. Like, what is the
Yeah.
feeling on your skin? Like, you know, are you overwhelmed by the smell of something? Like, all of
Mhm.
these things are our internal messaging system. And like, is your inbox like over full and you're just like not getting the messages? Like, yeah, what's going on? I like that you talked about the storms of it, right?
Yeah,
And in Arizona, you just have this oppressive heat that is just like
sure.
beats you down. But then in summer, the monsoons roll through and the outside matches the inside.
Mm.
And you break through that oppression. You just have these like giant electrical storms and everything is like just and it
Yeah.
feels so good to feel that
Yeah.
energy flowing through.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I totally. Yes. And so in line with our somaticness, right? It's finding storms that feel good, not the hurricane that destroys, right? Like there's a big
right.
difference between that. There's a big difference between being so dysregulated that I'm dissociated on the floor and a gentle palpitation in my chest because I'm scared, right? And so what does it
Yeah.
mean to work with like exposure therapy and gentle exposure to that in safe
Hmm.
environments? Because that can be a really big difference in terms of what feels accessible for these things.
Right. Yeah, the storm should bring relief, relief from the heat, relief from the oppression, right? It should bring relief and not
Right.
tear your house apart.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. And so being kind with yourself in that process. I'm curious too, what are some of the joys that you've experienced in relationship anarchy?
Oh, I mean, there are so many joys, but the one that has staying power, real come back to staying power, is the healing joy. Like
Mm.
we're all healing. We're all moving energy through. You can't avoid suffering. You can't avoid trauma, and we all have it. Having these conversations and opening the space to care for that, making space
Mhm.
is healing. When I have a conflict with Kelly and just kind of coming to rely on, coming to know that it's a sustainable thing that we do to open the space and to whatever it is, attend to it with care. That's so healing.
Mm.
And the joy that emanates from that is so powerful and so lasting.
Right.
So yeah, there's that. There's also like, ooh, we get to play, we get to be in pleasure. Like we
Mm.
get to get to the fun parts faster and have
Yeah.
more of them. And that's very joyful. But I think the healing aspect of it is beyond anything.
Yeah, absolutely. We heal in relationships. So the power of finding those people where we can grow together. I mean, it makes me so excited about the next year, the next two, the next five, the next 10. Whoa. What sort of intimate, loving connection are we going to be in? It's going to be even wilder than I can possibly think about right now. And yeah, so many of those moments of emotional experiences, the storms, the complexities of it, the difficult trips on the psychedelic. I think, when I think back to that experience I had mentioned earlier about my partner dancing with somebody else or, having kinky play or kissing or caressing, all of those times, the ways that those drops on the lead climb, on the paraglide, whatever you want to, every time that I dropped, oh, it was intense. Oh my goodness, it was intense. And also, there was like an afterglow after that. I think that's what for me was very interesting. I don't think I could have predicted that because what was needed for grounding after that, rather than going into a state of like compression of saying, I can never do this, I can't, I'm all alone, all that sadness, what would come out was this, okay. How do I ground myself right now? I am a beautiful, sovereign being. No one else is going to be me. There is no replacing me. And if my lover wants to be with me, they will want to be with me. And I don't have to put a cage onto them or anybody else in my world. I am beautiful. I am intelligent. I am powerful. I am empathetic. I am strong and I can do difficult things. And so when I would come out after one of those, I'd be like blowing, bouncing. Like, don't get me wrong, I was crying on the floor before that, but to reground, I was like,
Hmm.
damn,
That's a
whoa.
really, really beautiful inventory of self and like capital S self, right? Like really beautiful returning to self. What a great opportunity, like what great opportunities to do that, to return to self. Like amazing.
And then I'd ask them, can you hold me? Because I want to snuggle. That's my favorite.
Such good practice asking for what you need, for
Absolutely.
being open to receiving too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the vulnerability of so much of it is like, can I name, hey, I'm having this reaction in all of our relationships, right? I think this is where these skills, these difficult things, these storms that we've gone through become skills for all of our relationships. Hey, I'm having this reaction. I don't want to be attached to this reaction. I'm having it. It's valid. I need support of a hug. Can you support me by giving me some space? I'm going to go for a walk, right? So that ability to not attach to your reaction, to name what you need and communicate that with other people, those are skills that you need for all relationships.
Yeah. It's all, what does Ram Dass say? He says it's all grist for the mill. Yeah.
Mm, Yeah. And I'm curious, the final question.
Hmm.
What do you wish other people knew about relationship anarchy?
It has gifts to give for anybody in any relationship structure.
Right.
You don't need to be, you know, dating a million people or sharing
Right.
yourself or spreading yourself too thin. You can be with that one person and still benefit immensely from understanding these concepts, this language, these practices, the people in these communities. You can still benefit immensely from connecting to that.
Yeah, I think that, if anarchy is about dismantling power structures, I think one of the biggest things is that there's no one way to be in pleasure. There is no one way to be in relationship with others, right? And so if in a relationship anarchist comes to you and says, you are not doing enough to get this label, I'm almost a little bit more concerned. I think that the only part where I usually come in and say, well, maybe that's not anarchy is if you think that you exist in a silo, if you think that you exist in a
Mm-hmm.
way where it's just
Hmm.
you up in there and you're not connected to the reality that, hey, you exist in relationships with community and people. That's usually I'm like, okay, maybe we could draw the line and say that's not relationship anarchy. But beyond that, to come in and say, like, this is the way to do it, this is the way to practice is almost, in my opinion, very antithetical to the actual value system of anarchy.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
ego in those statements,
Yeah. And
and
hurt.
that's
Let me honor
yeah,
that. Hey man,
yeah,
when we have been so blocked off from access, you get almost vitriolic towards other people. I've been there towards other people like,
yeah.
"Hey, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? Come on." It's like that's reflective of our
Protective.
own. Yeah.
Yeah, it's protective. Yeah,
Yeah, totally. Totally. So we can have compassion for that journey and the ups and downs of that
absolutely,
one.
absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's been such a joy. I want to be sure to take a deep breath with you as we come towards the end of our time. And I'm just going to check in to see if there's anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners. Otherwise, I can guide us towards a closing question.
Gosh, no, this has been fantastic. I just want to share some gratitude with you and for
Oh,
everyone who is listening. Like, I'm sending out gratitude
yeah.
for attending to your own heart
Yeah.
and doing your own work. Like, yeah, that's all I want to share.
Yeah. So beautiful. And thank you for trusting me. I'm so honored every time that people from around the world like trust me. I'm always like, what? That's so cool. Hi.
You have a really cool job that you've carved out for yourself. Like, you are really giving yourself some fantastic medicine.
Right. I'm having lots of fun. I think that as a pleasure activist, I need to keep having fun in this space, and that will be my goal here. And hopefully, we'll all have fun in it together.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, then, the last question that I ask every guest on the show, Miles, is what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
The non-normality of it all, the uniqueness of everything, every little thing. And if I might add one more thing,
Sure.
being overwhelmed.
Sure. Yeah, well, when you take a world where everything is unique, if you actually slow down to think about that, whoa, that is overwhelming. Let's go back to the beginning of our conversation. The universe, whoa, you know? Yeah.
The subtlety can be overwhelming.
hmm Yeah, turning on the full saturation can be intense to step into, but also what a beautiful world to be in your relationships and your connection to others and yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's been such a joy to have you on the podcast. Again, thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being so vulnerable and for joining me and all of the listeners today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.